Hey everybody, it's Dr. Aline Potvin. Tuning in again for another Wellness Ed Sunday. Welcome. I hope everyone has had a great weekend. Today, and actually this entire month, I'm going to be doing a bit of a zoom in on the lymphatic system. Last month in February, I talked a lot about the cardiovascular system, and this month I'm going to talk about its cousin, the system that is actually not really discussed very much, actually, when it comes to conventional healthcare, health education, all of that. But it's an incredibly important system. So today what we're going to do is we're going to start by discussing a little around the anatomy and physiology of the lymphatic system, what it does for us, and why it's important to support it. And then through the rest of the month, I'm going to dig a little bit deeper into some of the lifestyle changes that I ask people to do or to try to support the lymphatic system naturally. And then also discussing some herbal supports as well as we progress through the month. And this is a really good time to be talking about the lymphatic system, because some of the primary jobs of the lymphatic system is transfer of fluid and substances between the tissues and the cardiovascular system. So to backtrack a little bit, let's talk a little bit about anatomy. So your lymphatic system is comprised of nodes and lymphatic vessels. We also have lymphoid tissues, so other organs and glandular tissues that are part of the overall immune system, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in just a bit. But if we look at the places where we have lymphatic vessels, it essentially is following the pathway of the cardiovascular system, because remember, one of the primary jobs of the lymphatic system is to actually allow for exchange of all sorts of different chemicals, nutrients, what have you, and waste primarily between the tissues and the vascular system. And it does that by closely following the pipeline of our vascular vessels. Now, the big differences are that the lymphatic system is actually made up of vessels that are incredibly delicate. And in addition to that, the lymphatic system is a one-way pump. So when I talked about the cardiovascular system, we were looking at this closed circuit where all of the vessels were connected in a closed system. And it was moving the blood that was contained within that system was moving in a cyclical, had a cyclical movement to it. The lymphatic system, on the other hand, has a one-way direction. It's going to be moving fluid from the tissues and draining it back into what are going to be larger and larger lymphatic vessels until it reaches the largest ones that are sitting just over the left side of the chest, so over the heart. And those vessels are going to be, the entirety of the lymphatic system is going to be a pipeline that's following alongside all of those vascular vessels. And it's acting as a conduit between tissues and the blood. So these vessels, our lymphatic vessels, are, like I mentioned earlier, very delicate. And for that reason, very minimal pressure will actually close them off. But much like our veins, they actually require movement on our part. They require muscular contraction to move fluid back towards the heart. And this is really important. This is how we get wastes from all of our cells that are running all sorts of chemical reactions, wastes from them back to the heart, which is going to allow for blood to be run through our organs of elimination that is now containing that waste that's been exchanged through the lymphatic system. So it acts as a filter for our fluid, and we are made up of 2/3 water, pretty damp individuals. So So we have a lot of fluid and a lot of cellular processes that are producing waste that are, requiring us to have this consistent filtering. So that's one big job of the lymphatic system. It is also the superhighway of our immune system. So it's the structure through which we're going to have movement and traveling of white blood cells and different mediators. And that's going to be extended out into the blood, into the tissues. But our lymph nodes within our lymphatic system are where we have white blood cell maturation. Certain types of white blood cells are going to mature there. So for our very immune status, movement and the filtering and movement of lymphatic fluid is really, really key. Would we have any sort of inflammatory response or a mounting of an immune response, you're going to have an activation of the cells that are existing and maturing within those nodes. So some of you, I'm sure most of you, at some point or another have been sick, and you've noticed that when you've gotten a really bad cold or flu, you've probably gotten some body aches, maybe a little bit achy in your joints. Most of our nodes are going to be clustered. If you ever look at a map of the lymphatic system, what you'll notice is that there's clusters of lymph nodes in certain spots in the body in most people, and you'll see that a large part of them are going to be very much centered in our gut. That's where a large portion of our lymphatic system lives, because that's where most of our immune system lives. So we have a large kind of central distribution of lymph nodes there, but we also have lymph nodes at some pretty key joint spaces. So up in our armpits, in our groin area, and at our hip joints. And then, at our elbows, knees, any place where you have a collection of blood vessels too, because remember, lymphatic vessels are going to be following the same train tracks as our vascular system. So we have clusters of lymph nodes at those spaces, and what's happening is that there's a draining, again, in the direction of the heart, a draining of lymphatic fluid through those vessels. They're getting filtered through those nodes. So it's like checkpoints almost on the way from your extremities, from your fingers and toes, and from your head and neck. Those lymph nodes clusters of lymph nodes are essentially checkpoints for your immune system. So fluid is getting filtered through, and it's allowing for your immune system to be able to check in and see if anything needs to be acted upon. So when you get a cold or a flu, you'll notice that there's going to be some swelling of those lymph nodes. You'll also notice that there's going to be enlarged lymph nodes and activation of those lymph nodes anytime you have any sort of infection in that general area. So for example, it's not uncommon for, if people get a cut on their hand or wrist or arm, forearm, that gets infected, what they'll oftentimes notice is that the lymph nodes around their elbow or their armpit actually are swollen. And it's because those lymph nodes, those checkpoints, have been activated. They've been told, the cells that are maturing in that space have been told that there's something to be responding to from an immune perspective, and so there's going to be activation there. And when people get joint pain, again, when there's cold or flu involved, it's because it happens in those spaces because there's immune activation that happens there. So we have some pretty key actions that we've discussed already as far as the lymphatic system goes. It's a primary, it's the transfer of materials and wastes between the tissues and the vascular system so that the cardiovascular system can push that fluid through our organs of elimination and allow us to get rid of stuff, right? Secondly, it's the superhighway for our immune system. And another big job of the lymphatic system is the transfer of fat-soluble nutrients and fats. So it's actually really important when you're thinking about nutritional support. From my perspective, it doesn't really help us any if a person, gets the nutrients into their body, is actually able to absorb it. If you're not supporting flow within the tissues, you're really missing out on an opportunity to get some of those nutrients, assuming that you're getting it into the vascular system and into the lymphatics. You're missing out on an opportunity for the cells to actually use that nutrients if you're not moving. And again, the primary way to move along the lymphatics is by actually moving. And I'm not talking, really strenuous exercise, just regular daily movement as opposed to exercise. Exercise, of course, helps, but movement in general, those very basic muscular contractions that we do anytime we move around, that's incredibly supportive of our lymphatic system and ultimately our immune system and our nutritional status. So these are really, really key jobs that are contributing to the balanced state of our body. Now, some really interesting things that have come up in studying the lymphatic system in the last few years. For the longest time, we actually didn't think that the nervous system had, or that the lymphatic system had access to the nervous system because of the blood-brain barrier. So we have tight junctions in the vessels that supply our brain that are meant to be protective for us. They're meant to ensure that we don't have exchange of dangerous chemicals into the neurological system, into the central nervous system more specifically. And so we thought for a long time that we didn't actually have lymphatic movement to the central nervous system as well. We've since discovered in the last couple of years that that's not the case. And so it's starting to allow us an opportunity to understand how inflammation and immunological responses, immune responses, actually can contribute to alterations in our mood and our mental status and our mental state, emotional state. So the interesting thing about, if we think about the anatomy of the lymphatic system, part of the reason why we don't know much about it is because those vessels, those really delicate lymphatic vessels, are very difficult to preserve. So it's part of the reason why we're still starting to understand what would seem to be pretty key aspects of how the lymphatic system works. So that's pretty cool, and I get really passionate about helping people support their lymphatic systems because I think it's a really big missing piece in terms of understanding how to keep people feeling energized, alert, managing their immune status, and how that works in their best favor. And I think that because we're exposed to so many different chemicals, daily exposure to things in our body care products, in the air that we breathe, and the food that we eat, our body has this amazing capacity to clear toxins. I mean, given how much we are exposed to, it's pretty incredible. We have amazing organs of elimination for the most part. However, there are ways to optimize how we can reduce, in addition to reducing exposure, there are ways to optimize how our systems are working in our favor. And so that's why I'm really passionate about helping people support their lymphatic systems, particularly because I work primarily with a population that is women with autoimmune disease. So we're looking a lot at how to reduce inflammation from a systemic perspective, which if we're not looking at the lymphatics and fluid movement, then we're not addressing inflammation. So looking at inflammation, how the immune system is functioning and acting, and also trying to understand how to maximize their body's ability to heal itself. And so when the body is able to get rid of its own metabolic wastes really effectively, it can heal much more effectively. It can repair itself much more effectively. So there's many, many benefits to making that part of any kind of healthcare plan. Whether or not somebody is experiencing a really acute illness like a cold or a flu, or experiencing chronic health issues that require that additional consideration. So I'm really looking forward this month in the next few installments of Wellness Ed Sunday to talk a little bit about lifestyle changes that can be supportive of the lymphatic system, and then eventually looking at some of the herbal stuff. Though I will be teaching an intensive lymphatic course on the 15th, I believe it's the 15th of this month. So it'll be an herbalism course specifically on herbs to support the lymphatic system. And again, this is going to incorporate a bit of hydrotherapy, which is going to be awesome. I'm super excited for that. And looking at herbs that are specifically going to be acting or are included in formulations specifically for their lymphatic actions. So that's on the 15th. I'll put the link below for any of you that are local and want to join me. My herbal classes are always a really great sensory experience. We really get engaged and get to know the plants. So by all means, bring your friends, join me. I'll put the link below to the registration. So that's coming up on the 15th. Pre-registration is necessary just because of materials and things like that. But I'll let you go for tonight. I hope everyone has a really excellent week, and we are approaching spring equinox. So now is the time to really get in there and start discussing and supporting your lymphatic system. So take care, everybody. I hope you have a good week.